Another grim and tragic pandemic milestone has been reached today. In this country, we've now lost 1 in 500 Americans to COVID-19. Still, people like Tucker Carlson can't let any chance at disseminating disinformation slip away from him, doubling down last night on Nicki Minaj's tweet from 2 days ago, an unproven claim about a vaccine side effect that isn't, an account from her cousin's friend, criticized by scientists and doctors as false information. Watch.
We haven't been able to figure out whether this show is broadcast in Trinidad, but if Nicki Minaj's cousin's friend is watching, or his former fiance is watching, we want to hear your story. We'll come to Port of Spain to see you.
Let's go to Trinidad to hear the story. Let's bring into our coverage Dr. Peter Hotez, co-director of the Center for Vaccine Development at Texas Children's Hospital and the dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. You've been warning about vaccine disinformation. I know you have literally written the book about it. So I don't want to ask you your surprise, but are you discouraged by how much heat and energy is behind the right-wing disinformation campaign being waged all day, every day?
You know, Nicole, I think by next week we're going to reach 675,000 Americans who've lost their life from COVID-19. That number is significant because that's the CDC's estimate of the number of people who died in the 1918 to 1921 flu pandemic. So we're about to exceed that, and we're going to reach around 800,000 deaths by the end of the year. And so many of those deaths were not only from the SARS-2 coronavirus, it was defiance against vaccines, especially in the last few months. This is death by anti-science. And a lot of this has been coming out of the nighttime Fox News anchors, this disinformation. And, you know, I'm often asked about Tucker Carlson or, you know, the others, Laura Ingraham, I don't know. And what I say is, look, I don't think this has anything to do with the individual Fox anchors. This is coming from the top. This is a war of aggression against science and scientists coming out of Fox News as part of a larger authoritarian effort to discredit science and scientists. And I don't really know what the motivation is, but it's having just a devastating effect. Just since May alone, Nicole, 100,000 Americans who have lost their lives, almost all of them unvaccinated, despite the availability of safe and effective vaccines. These are 100,000 lives that never had to be lost, and it goes beyond heartbreaking.
The Pope today weighed in, saying this, humanity has a history of friendship with vaccines. Does that help? I mean, can we still be helped by reassurances on the other side of the equation?
No, absolutely, and we need the clergy to step up in a big way. And so, yes, absolutely, the Pope has a lot of influence, and the Vatican has been pretty strong on vaccines and vaccinations in recent history. So that certainly helps. But, you know, we've got now so much of this anti-vaccine, anti-science sentiment coming out of the far right, and tragically people are defining their allegiance or defining their belonging to a group by defying vaccines. And now you're starting to see this move up into Canada as well. So we've been exporting this kind of anti-science aggression from the far right. And we've also seen similar health freedom, phony language like that used now in the UK and in Europe. Yeah. So we export our culture, and we're exporting this.
I am excited and very supportive of the Freedom to Vote Act. It takes the best intentions that we have for protecting our democracy and concretizes it, making sure that we have uniform standards across this country so that the quality of our democracy doesn't vary from geography to geography or based on your race.
Stacey Abrams' endorsement of the newly revealed Freedom to Vote Act, a bill that now has the unique distinction of full Democratic support in the U.S. Senate, carries immense weight. Here's what's in the bill. It remedies restrictions by enabling all voters to request mail-in ballots and putting in place minimum standards to ensure that drop boxes are available to all voters. The measure also requires states to offer at least 15 days of early in-person voting to register eligible voters automatically with their driver's license and to offer Election Day registration. In addition, the bill sets reliable evidentiary standards to constrain the massive voter registration purges that are taking place in states such as Georgia. Crucially, for in-person voting, the bill makes Election Day a holiday. It also targets Georgia's inhumane new legislation that prohibits individuals from providing water or food to voters waiting in long lines. Joining us now, Senator Angus King of Maine. He's a member of the Intelligence and Armed Services Committees. It's great to see you, Senator. Tell me where this stands.
Well, it stands that the bill was introduced yesterday and the ink was hardly dry before apparently the Republicans in a uniform way said no, which really disappoints me because a lot of effort went into really paring down the bill that passed the House last year and getting to a place that I think is a common sense set of minimum standards to apply across the country. And the fact that the Republicans apparently have just rejected it out of hand, I suspect not many of them have read it. And I find that very disappointing. So what happens now? We have to really face a moment of truth, and that is, what do we do about the filibuster? I've always been one that's been very reluctant about changing the filibuster because, you know, what is now an annoying nuisance to the majority can turn into a shield later on when the shoe's on the other foot. On the other hand, we're talking about democracy itself here, and we're talking about the right to vote. And what really bothers me, I have to tell you, I feel like the world's turned upside down. When I was governor, I used to have a standing bet with my colleague Jesse Ventura in Minnesota about which state would have the highest turnout. I thought that was the whole idea. More people voting. That's what democracy should be all about. And we were always trying to see, you know, who could have the highest turnout. And here we are now, and we've got a political party that seems to be betting its future on keeping people from voting. So I think there's going to be a lot of very deep conversation about where we go from here. I don't think the filibuster will be necessarily abolished, but I think it may be modified in some way. And here's the numerical reality, Nicole. I did the math the other day. You can assemble 41 Republican senators, which is enough to block anything, representing 24% of the American people. That means 24% of the American people's representatives can block what 76% of the American people's representatives want. And I don't think the framers contemplated that. They knew fractions. They put them in the Constitution in various places, but they didn't put a fraction in the Constitution for the passage of major legislation. So there's going to be some heavy debate over the next several weeks. I hope some of the Republicans will come around and say, wait a minute, this bill's not so bad. We ought to talk about possibly coming to some resolution here.
There's nothing bad in the bill, but Republicans won't come around. I mean, they've shown you who they are. Isn't it time to believe them?
Well, yeah, you know me, Nicole. I'm a perennial optimist, and maybe there'll be some public pressure. My sense is that the public understands this issue and supports what we're trying to do here, which, again, are common sense sort of minimum standards nationwide. This isn't a federal takeover of elections. It's setting some minimum standards, and then the states will run the elections as they always have. And by the way, the Constitution expressly contemplates Congress stepping in this kind of situation with regard to voting rights in the states. And the other thing that's frustrating is the Voting Rights Act was last renewed in 2006. You know what the vote was? 98-0.
I mean,
why has this become a partisan issue? I don't really get it.
Yes, you do. And may I just speak as a former political operative. You have 65% of the public. You don't need to do any public relations around this bill. What you need to do is get your caucus on board with suspending the filibuster. And I wonder if you could share with us who you think the holdouts will be.
Well, I'm not going to do that. You're free to ask that question. I'm not going to answer it. But I mean, I think it's well known that Joe Manchin from the state of Senator Byrd is very reluctant about it. Christian Sinema has mentioned it. There are others. And as I say, I was always one that said, you know, we got to be careful here because this could come back and bite us in 2, 4, 6, 8 years. But I think, again, democracy is a separate issue. And that's really what we're talking about. And everybody's on board in the caucus with this bill, including 2 independents, myself and Bernie. And so the question is, what will we do next? Jeff Merkley from Oregon has really done a enormous amount of work on this, trying to find ways to modify the filibuster in such a way, for example, to make people talk. I mean, the public has an impression that the filibuster, you go and you got to hold the floor for hours and hours and hours. You know, Mr. Smith goes to Washington. That's not true anymore. It's too damn easy. You can phone in a filibuster. I am opposed. I'll filibuster. Okay, it requires 60 votes. So I think one of the options is to make it harder and make the people who want to block things hold the floor and make their argument to the American people. There are a lot of other possibilities. For example, instead of requiring 60 votes to go ahead, you require 40 votes to stop. That means they have to show up. So, as I say, there are going to be lots of discussions. I believe, Nicole, that you're going to see some changes in the filibuster as a result, not of what the Democrats and the Democratic caucus want to do, but because the Republicans won't just even discuss the issue.
Have other people had the evolution you've had, people who were previously reluctant to touch it but now think it's a good idea?
I think they have. I think a lot of people, and again, I distinguish between various pieces of legislation on this or that subject, immigration or whatever, and democracy itself. And, you know, it's ironic that you're talking about minority control on democracy, which has the effect of disenfranchising minorities around the country. I think there are other people that have had that evolution. And like I say, I don't think I'm prepared to abolish it altogether, but I am prepared to make some changes that I think will be necessary and that will enable us to finally move forward on this.
When you're ready to share any names with us, please come back. I have to ask you, you had a breakthrough COVID case. How are you feeling? And did it change any of your views on mandates or indoor mask wearing, regardless of vaccine status?
Well, I did, and I was pretty sick for 2 or 3 days. The symptoms started to dissipate. I had to isolate for 10 days. My wife would bring the food to put it by the door, knock on the door, and then run. But I'm fine now. It did. But here's the reality, Nicole. I think the vaccine saved my life.
Yeah.
If I hadn't been vaccinated, given the severity of the symptoms that I had, which is like the worst head cold you ever had times 2, if I hadn't been vaccinated, there's no question I would have been in the hospital. 99% of the people in the hospital today are unvaccinated. And over 90% of those who had a breakthrough case like I did aren't in the hospital. So it really confirmed my belief in the vaccine. And this is a case where, you know, people talk about personal freedom. Well, you don't have the freedom to infect somebody else. And you know, if you don't care about your own health, that's one thing. But people are something like 5 times more likely to spread the disease if they're unvaccinated. And I just think that's unacceptable. So I have the personal experience of absolutely believing that the vaccine is a lifesaver. And this pandemic would be largely over. What we're having now is a distinct, separate pandemic from the one we had last year. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The pandemic for the vaccinated is over, except for these breakthrough cases, which end up with symptoms that are clearly survivable. But that's what's really troubling about this. And I think we need to move on. I mean, all of us had vaccinations as kids. Come on, George Washington had the Army in the Revolution vaccinated for smallpox, and I lived through polio. I lived through the polio scourge in the 50s. Polio was eliminated by the vaccine. I think a lot of these folks have forgotten that. Vaccines are a miracle of modern medicine, and they save millions of lives around the world. And let's get over it and move on and save lives here. Every death that we have that's unvaccinated is a preventable death, and that's a tragedy.